Before we begin this episode, we'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the losses brought on by the California fires. Among those losses was nearly the entire town of Altadena, the hometown of our sound engineer and friend, Mark Stockwell. Beyond his technical contribution to making this podcast, he has been a sounding board, creative voice, and grounding force as we've navigated challenging conversations and shouldered some tragic losses. He's donated significant time and effort to this show because, like us, he cares very much about the community this podcast serves. Our hearts go out to him as well as the rest of California as they pick up the pieces of their communities, and it's with him in mind and in true Hollywood fashion that we say, the show must go on.
See you down there?
Yeah, my brother.
Have fun. See you in a few.
Let's fucking get it. All right, 3, 2, 1. See ya.
Hello, friends. You're listening to Exit Point,
A podcast about the advancement of bass jumping and the exploration of its culture.
Join us for valuable insights and gripping stories from some of the world's top adventure athletes.
Oh my God, that's the sickest thing I ever did in my life! Woo!
How do you like your voice on tape?
It's not bad. It's the cycle of hearing my breath, thinking like, don't focus on that too much because you're going to get anxious about your breath, and then you're going to be like...
Yeah, that's generally why I wear the headphones, and you can just be the way you normally are. But it's kind of cool to hear your voice on tape because it does usually, like, you think you sound worse than you do. And then once you're professionally mic'd, it's like, oh, this is great. I love this.
I have, a normal human voice.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
not insane.
Yeah, it's a weird psychological distortion that I think we all go through, where in which we start to imagine our voice differently, and then all of a sudden we don't even recognize it.
But of course you imagine your voice differently when we talked about our phones videoing voice, and it sounds
terrible,
horrible.
Yeah,
you're so embarrassed, especially when you're recording at a concert. You don't remember that you sang along to the song. You think you got this incredible clip of an artist.
Yeah, the compression on most recording equipment is awful, and so like when we're showing up on GoPro videos or cell phone videos, we sound horrible.
I'm gonna take that to my grave. Anytime I have a horrible sounding voice in a video and get self-conscious, it's just terrible. It's just terrible video quality. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I would, you know what? We can maybe use that excuse for everything too. No, dude, you didn't see that happen. That's just poor video quality.
Yeah. You don't know what you saw.
Yeah. No, I didn't clip those.
How do you know?
Exactly. That's like
they're gonna know. How would they know?
Yeah, what you're witnessing is parallax vision and plate tectonics working in conjunction to warp the wide angle, and so it looks like I came really close to dying right there, but actually I was miles away, bro. I was miles away.
That sounds like every douchey bass jumper at the God Complex. I just heard that exact phrase in different sayings in my head.
Well, if ever you want me to do an impression, I have been or experienced almost every archetype at this point. 20 years in the game, man, I've said and done some shit.
You've been every archetype.
Yeah, dude, seriously.
Let alone seen all of it.
Oh my God, yeah. That's what happens when you start way too soon. Like when you start the journey as soon as humanly possible. Holy shit, man.
And you survive through all of it.
Yeah,
you actually get to see the big picture. Like, oh God.
So speaking of the big picture, let's go to the local picture right now. I saw you in the park the other day, and it still seems like the weather here in Moab is good enough to be doing silks in the park.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. How's the winter season going for you?
It's going all right. It's my first season living full time in Moab. I've been here seasonally the past 4 or so years, every spring and fall. So this is the first time that I'm out of the van in a house, can have a bit of stability, a bit of structure, and it's been fantastic to settle in to the slow season here. I've only ever experienced the craziness and the hype of the busy season, and so this has just been such a gift to also start forming closer, more intimate relationships with people that are full-time here and that live here. You kind of get all the hustle and bustle away, and you're left with a very intimate community that's very connected and very beautiful, I think. And so I personally, after Tokyo Boogie, stopped jumping as much as I was and started focusing on a few other things. Really, the Silks was fantastic. Came at a fantastic time. And I'm still flying, I'm still speed flying, but the winter season's treating me very well, I think.
So from Wook to Nook, does it feel good to be in town and not be in the category of Wook?
Oh my Lord. It's so nice. I love it. It's so nice. Not that the category of Wook is ever a bad thing, but it's kind of hard to truly integrate into a community where you are seen as a transient and you are seen without really, like, you are in some respect on the fringes of every community you're in because you're constantly moving. So like, as much as you are here during the busy times and are here throughout the year, and as much as I'm sure people would view me or respect me as somebody that is in the community, living here and being here is just so great for my psyche and for my mentality of just like being able to connect with the community and feel like I can bring something to the table now that I'm not the one knocking on all my friends' doors for showers and, you know, like I can let somebody park in front of my house for once, you know. It's
nice to be on the giving end. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I also use the term endearingly. You know, I love Wooks, and over the years I've been one and I've housed them and it's been great. I also know that, you know, from the home like dweller perspective, it is challenging to bring in a Wook as deeply as you can, you know, with somebody that's living here. Like we can only bring in a Wook so much and then they're gone. So like that lifestyle inherently is a little more disconnected. Yeah.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
And it's a great trade-off when that's your priority, is to see the world and explore and integrate yourself into as many communities and as many experiences as you can.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I really, really enjoyed that transient lifestyle until my priorities started shifting and it no longer served me. And I struggled with that a lot because that was my part of my identity. I was always the person that moved around and, you know, went to different ski resorts in the winter and different drop zones in the summer. And so taking that away was like, oh God, what am I? Who am I? Like, God forbid, you know?
I know that I miss a day on the hill.
But I didn't quite, oh gosh, yeah. God forbid I get under 100 days skiing.
Right.
Like, I
or
live
that
there,
big swell,
to.
You weren't there, bro. Yep.
No. Oh God. So, but I started realizing that none of those things were making me happy because I was missing the bigger picture and how my priorities were shifting. And my neurodivergent brain loves routine and loves constant, which is weird for a van lifer to say, I feel, but that constant for me was moving around and jumping around. And so to sit in one place was wild, but allowed me and does, you know, now allow me to have some, like, take a deep breath and just exist without constantly like buzzing around and needing that new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Time to reflect.
Yeah.
Which is great because like oftentimes we go through all of those carousel experiences so quickly that like we never really package any of it. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like you forget it almost before you can enjoy it because you're on to the next thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of identity, that's kind of one of the first questions I wanted to dive into was that you were, let's say, resistant to putting your voice on record. And you had an explanation of that I'm curious to dive into. What was the initial apprehension about?
Yeah. Well, besides the obvious insecurities that everybody thinks about is, oh my gosh, I'm going to be seen by so many people, and also people that I very much respect and view as highly as I do. I think it's really scary to put something out there that you can't take back in that regard. But personally, I kind of started to think about, after we talked in the park, what my apprehension was and why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And I think it's because I'm about to enter a part of jumping. I'm almost at 200 jumps, and I can't remember where I heard or who I heard this from, but like the 200 jump number is that danger zone for base jumpers that I always hear, where you have some experience and you have some knowledge, and that can carry you really far, but the complacency and the ego really start to battle with that after, and again, number is number. Like I say, 200 jumps, it could be anything for anybody, but a lot of people will throw a number similar out there.
I think it's a pretty agreed upon number, because it's the number where a lot of people allow for the next complication to be facilitated. Like, 200 jumps before your wingsuit terrain flying, or 200 jumps before you're doing like this crazy building in the middle of a city, 200 jumps is arguably where like the, the shit gets real. And it's like also a time where you are at the, that critical point where you're doing the next tier of complicated thing, but you are the least experienced of the people doing that next tier.
Yes.
Right. And it's like really where your fundamental background and education come into play. Because like some people can get to 200 base jumps without like really any supporting, knowledge or skill set. And now if you're compounding this with like the next tier of base jumping,
yeah, it's spooky. And being in Moab, you see more than, Moab is just such a huge hub for base jumpers. You're around so much of it. And for me personally, I notice myself in big groups or just in social situations in general, wanting my voice heard. And I think a lot of that comes from ego, but you hit that 200 jump number, you hit wherever that is where you feel a bit more confident and a bit more independent in your jumping, and the ego starts to come into play, and you want to be a part of the conversation because, you're puffing up your chest. Like you're that big base jumper, you know what you're doing, and not really know what you're doing, but like, and that's not
why
to
shouldn't
say
you be
what
part of the
I'm
conversation?
doing.
Why shouldn't you be part of the conversation at 200 jumps? Why not?
No,
why would you not be able to be
point.
part of the conversation at one jump?
Yeah. I think, okay, so let me finish my initial thought, which was, for me, I'm noticing more and more my wanting to speak out and say things when we're in random conversations about base jumping
100%.
that I might not have a solid factual background to back that up. And my progression, noticing that, is something that I really wanted to pay attention to. And where I'm at now, I am trying to emphasize silence and listening and not letting my social anxiety and my brain overtake and start talking before I really have a good grip on what I'm saying.
Yeah. I get you. Like, it's hard to insert yourself into a conversation when you don't know something,
Yeah.
But like, the knowing is on a spectrum. And so I think like what you owe is to put your experience in context, right? Like then everybody can say like, okay, that this is where the experience is coming from. And then you can say whatever you feel, which like might not be substantiated in like scientific fact, but could very well be fucking right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess my follow-up question then is, where are you at with base jumping right now?
In terms of
like
mentality or experience. Or experience.
Yeah.
Well, I've been in the sport since October of 2022, and I did Chuma's course, and I have lived and jumped primarily in Moab since then. And so my jumping experience is, I think when I look at my logbook, I have jumped here and the bridge. Yeah. I have not traveled around, but I have probably a deeper knowledge of Moab base jumping than your average jumper that comes and visits for Turkey Boogie but has jumped a bunch of other exits. So I've jumped around Moab as much as I could, but I lived in Moab before I started my base journey, and that was already step number one. People get scared. They're like, you're not even a base jumper yet and you live in Moab. You're going to take your first jump course, you're going to come straight back here and start raging.
That is a common thing to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that ride that dragon.
Totally. And I saw that a lot, and I saw that if I let myself, I could absolutely be that person, and that scared me in terms of sustainability. You know, I want to jump here for the rest of my life. I don't want to do the craziest, raddest jumps as soon as I can. And so I came here with about 25 bridge jumps and tried to promise myself that I would stick with static lines on specific exits until jump 100. And for me, that reasoning there's a few reasons, but the biggest one was stacking risk factors, because I had never jumped in Moab before. Every single exit was brand new. So that in itself is a new thing. Most likely I was coming back after a bridge first jump course straight to Turkey Boogie. So I was meeting new people every day. There was a bunch of stoke. People were, just out to rage. And for me, taking out the free fall aspect right off the beginning, when I also felt very new, just felt like the right thing to do, to give myself the best chances, and to also experience Moab, experience all of the exits and the approaches, because my God, some of these approaches are
some of them are gnarly.
Spookier than the jump.
The jump's 100%.
And I never met a group of people that were more sandbagger.
It's no problem. Just bring good shoes.
And then you see the person next to you climbing up this insane approach in their Chacos and Tivas,
Right.
and you're like, what? What am I a part of right now?
Yeah, and here's the thing on a lot of that stuff, like those people that are leading those groups, like they've done the progression to that rock. Like I've seen this happen so many times where like, homie's done this exact route with ropes, without ropes, like without pack, with a pack, like the whole 9 yards for years. And so like, it is like he knows every single crack in that thing. Right. And then like everybody else is learning for the first time. It's like, if you had to go back in time and free solo this with a pack on in Chacos, come on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so for me, it was kind of pre-planning, choosing to stick with static lines, because now that I'm free falling most things, I've taken out a lot of the mental stress and anxiety of these exits, because not as many of them are new to me anymore. And so I'm going to these exits to free fall them for the first time, but I've walked that path before. I've been up there. I've experienced that at least once. And so that put my mind at ease a lot, to take out as much risk factor in the beginning as I could to be more prepared.
Yeah. I think if you're looking for survival, let's just put it that way. I don't even care if it's long-term, short-term. If we're just looking at survival, then I'd say that that's the right way to do it. I mean, you come from freestyle and slope style ski world, right? Somewhat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Remember the rules of the park?
Mm-hmm.
It's pre-ride, re-ride, free ride. You do your pre-ride, you just kind of cruise by the jumps, check them all out, and then the next run, you do the simplest and easiest thing, like straight airs.
Well, wait, I've never. My experience skiing is
not there.
Okay. But I know what you're saying, but I'm not a park rat and have experience in that.
Fair enough. I mean, it applies to all the other runs too. If you're going backcountry or whatever else.
Totally.
Pre-ride, re-ride, free ride, and then you eventually do a little mini progression to every object. And so I think you're right on the money when it comes to jumping things in the least dangerous way possible. I'm not going to say safe, because none of them are, but you can always increase, you can always turn the volume up, right?
Yeah.
But if you get in over your head and it's easy to do, you can't exactly turn the volume down. That's that's that.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got a couple years in the sport, mostly out here jumping in Moab.
Mm-hmm.
You come from a couple of different backgrounds when it comes to extreme sports: skiing, climbing. You do some paragliding,
speed flying.
While we're on the topic of experience, how many total jumps? Even though I don't think that this is the whole picture, but what are the total jumps of base jumps that you've done?
I think I just hit 185.
185. And follow-up question, which I think should be asked alongside any time somebody asks this first question.
Okay.
How many walk-offs do you have?
Ooh, that's a great question. It makes me wish I had written it down, or, included that in my log, I'd say probably 10 to 15.
10 to 15. Okay. Yeah. So like a pretty good percentage. That's, what is that? Like, I'm going to fail at this math, somewhere close to 5%. I don't know. Yeah. Somebody that's better at math. Yeah. Out there. I know I've got a couple of students that are math whizzes. And so like, you work that out and please tell me. That's good. So, I think along with the like thousands of things that make up our experience, those two should definitely be like qualifying factors right next to each other.
Yeah.
You could have thousands of jumps. If you got no walk-offs, in my experience, like, or in my opinion, you have less experience than somebody who has fewer jumps than you and more walk-offs.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I think that definitely depends on the person too, because you have to understand your decision making and how your decision making changes in different environments. Like those people that have zero walk-offs, there's a chance. I know you're talking about the crowd, the most of the people, but I'm sitting over here thinking like, well, there are the people that make those decisions on the ground. And I know a lot of things change when you're up on the exit, but they're a lot harsher on their decision making.
oh yeah.
Before they even get out of the car.
Yeah, some people have a good flex move on I have no walk-offs, and that like I do my preparation so meticulously that like I've never needed to.
But even then, that raises red flags to me. I'm like, I have follow-up questions.
Right. How did you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Versus the people that like, they just send it no matter what because they want to like, do the jump, which understandable, like I was that way when I came up in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like I was like, never walk off. Like,
yeah.
Rise to the occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets in your head and your ego, and you're like, who am I? I'm the person that like, what does this mean that I walked off of this thing?
Right.
I'm not strong enough. Am I not this enough? Am I,
Yeah. And then you look back and you're like, I could have totally done that.
Yeah.
Dang it.
And you totally could have.
Yeah.
But you're at the bar grabbing a beer with friends. Like that's totally also okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're alive. That's better.
And you got a story and, in my opinion, more experience.
Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of experience, I also wanted to touch on this because it was one of the things that you brought up as far as being apprehensive about putting your voice out there, which I found incredibly interesting. The fact that like in Moab, you're surrounded by a lot of highly experienced people from all over the world because it's a world destination. And so like you've come up, you're now at this like, what would you call intermediate level?
Sure.
Okay. And you're surrounded by people who are like some of the world's best.
Yeah.
Which like you described as...
That doesn't make my voice want to be heard, and there's all of these unicorns out here that feel so untouchable and so much bigger than life, that they've gone through all of these things and experienced so much that, me, little 185 jump wonder that just started and learned that Moab existed 6 years ago, am going to be somebody that talks about it like that. That felt uncomfortable, I think.
Yeah. Like it might be somewhat of an imposter syndrome type of thing.
Exactly.
Okay. And a lot of people, I think, experience this and I try and like break it down because I don't see it the same way. Obviously we're here. I very much enjoyed the conversations that we've had over the years, even when you started, in the sport. Like, I mean, we were talking about base jumping. When was the first time? Like
2022, probably.
Yeah. Right. When you got out here, right. Mm-hmm. About parachute equipment and about all the technology
earlier
and stuff.
Than, geez. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I do truly think that people at your level, especially because they've been told like, oh my God, you're in the most dangerous zone, believe that the gap between you and everybody at the top is like huge.
Yeah.
And I'd like to like kind of dive into that a little bit and ask you like, we've had this kind of conversation, so feel free to take it a little bit farther than we did. But what do you think, just as a comparison, the gap between skydiver and base jumper, like, a licensed skydiver and just off their first jump course base jumper is?
I mean, we talked about this before, but it's still, the beginner skydiver doesn't really need to know too much. I mean, it doesn't take too much to fall out of a plane and pull the right thing.
Right. It's simple. I mean, you've got to be diligent about it. Like, I get it, right? But it's not complicated to the point where, the vast majority of people couldn't do it.
Totally. And I do think, the beginning base jumper is quite a bit different, and you would hope quite a little bit more prepared, but at the same time, a lot of base jumping, especially in the beginning when you're not pushing yourself into, aerials, terrain, et cetera,
it's pretty simple.
Really easy.
Yeah, it's pretty
for
simple.
99.9% of the time. A lot of the things you're training for that 0.001%.
Yeah.
And so I've seen plenty of base jumpers. I've watched. You're like, how did you get here?
Yeah. Well,
it's because everything has gone right.
Yeah.
So it's super easy.
Shown success all across the way, which is really easy for our industry to do. Like, we shepherd and facilitate from day one. Like, I don't see very many AFF programs where students are even allowed the space to make mistakes. They're just corrected immediately, right? And off we go. And success until, like, basically they get into a zone where they can really do themselves harm. And then it's like, okay, now you're on your own. Don't make any mistakes. Good luck.
Oh, absolutely. You get the reins and you just run.
Yeah. So I agree with you on the, the points that, like, you can kind of just show up and skydive, and people do kind of show up and base jump sometimes. But I'm really talking about, like, the gap between successful people. Like, what is the gap between a successful skydiving student and a successful early base jumping student in terms of, like, how big is that gap?
I mean, there's a lot more knowledge, and there's a lot more like
if we were to take it to an equivalent other sport, I'm saying, like, what could the comparison be drawn? I would say, for me, and I'm happy for you to take this one and run with it, like, I'll start with skydiving. I think to be a successful skydiver, you have to be the equivalent of basically a high school varsity athlete. Like, you can't fuck around. You've got to show up on time, and you've got to try hard, and you've got to have, like, some athletic ability, but you don't have to be, like, the most talented person in the world. And as long as you have a good attitude, you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like, you can be kind of out of shape, and you can mess around with your friends, and, like, it's totally all good.
Yeah.
Versus, like, where would you put, like, successful beginning base jumper on that, like, spectrum?
And I think we talked about, like, a D1 athlete in a college.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. To be a successful base student, there's a lot more factors. There's a lot more things that you would hopefully want to learn and be on top of versus learning skydiving, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, like, at that point where you're going to base jumping, like, the 99% of the time, and I also agree with this, you can be a high school varsity athlete or worse. You could be worse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like, you could be, like, just basically a sack of potatoes sometimes, and still,
I've
like,
seen
no
sack
problem.
of potatoes trip on the exit and have completely fine openings.
Yep, totally fine. Or people that are actively doing the wrong thing.
Absolutely.
Like, okay.
Or even teaching the wrong thing.
For that, like, that 1% chance, which will eventually hit you, like, you've only had basically 2 goes at the apple for that 1 in 100% chance. But man, when you get up there, like, that's a lot of chances. You really have to get your shit together. And I think, yeah, you have to be a D1 athlete in order to be unscathed from that 1 out of 100.
I think you can survive in that high school varsity athletic world, skydive world, and not even survive. You can thrive in it without a well-rounded approach.
Totally.
I think. And I think in base, you would hope that one would want to look at all of the aspects that they can and see the whole picture and not just let one part of that carry the team.
Totally. Yeah. In high school, like, all you got to do to make the team is to have, like, one tool. If you can throw that ball real well, or like kick that ball real well, like, that's all. If you got a great serve in tennis, like, that's all you need. Versus, like, D1, like, you need to be an expert in, like, nutrition, physical fitness, like, mental discipline, like, or else you're going to get weeded out. So, okay, if we agree on that one, then what is the difference now between where you're at base jumping and what you propose to be the top of base jumping?
I would say I'm continually, slowly learning more and more about each one of those aspects, and the things that will push me to grow in every aspect of bass is a mixture that is unique to me of time and experience. Not just the number of jumps, but, you know, what am I jumping? Where am I jumping? Who am I jumping with? What happened on those jumps? You know, how much experience have I had with off-heading, et cetera, versus just generally how much time. And I know that mixture is really precarious because, you know, one, it's going to be different for everybody. And two, we talked about like, what would you say to somebody that has been in the sport for 10 years, but they have 500, 400, 200, however many jumps, versus somebody that's been in the sport for 2 years and have racked up 800 jumps, 400, you know, just an insane number. I'm throwing out random numbers, but you get
I mean,
the
those
point.
people exist, you know,
Absolutely.
like, you know, I was just talking to Todd Schubotton the other day, you know, Apex, you know, legend. And his total jump numbers after, I think, 40 years in the sport was 1,200.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy crap, man. Like, I never expected to have more jumps than this man, you know?
Yeah. He seems so untouchable. I've got a buddy that has been in the sport for about a year and has already surpassed 300 jumps.
Right. Or you look at John Cox, who did, I think, 1,000 jumps in his first year.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think numbers are just numbers. They don't really tell much of the tale. And I'm not really asking like what's the difference between, well, maybe I was asking what the difference between that level and that level is. So that's a hard one. Let's maybe just like refine it to like, ooh, what's the difference between you and me in terms of gap?
See, I didn't have a great answer for that then, and I don't know if I have one now. I mean, that's what I'm always trying to figure out, of course. If you can figure out the gap, then you can close the gap. Then you can close it, you know. 100%. And right now, for me, that's just like this magical unicorn in between the two of us that I can't quite get a grip on to learn and eat it up, because it's just this like, you're so far away, you know. Gotcha.
Okay, so I'm going to break it down and see if you agree on this one. Since like we are both the masters of our own experience, I think we are like the unequivocal authorities on being able to say this. If you're familiar at all with formula racing, I think the nearest equivalent that like it describes the gap between us is that you are an up and coming and pretty talented Formula 3 driver, and I am a second like mate on one of the, you know, better teams, almost retired Formula 1 driver. You know, the guy like I'm like Prost at the end of his career, you know, like hanging around, giving some good advice. I can test run the cars, you know, but like, you know.
All right.
And I would say that that's the equivalent, you know, gap between you and the proposed like best in the world too. Like you're an up and coming Formula 3 driver. They might be one of the better and best Formula 1 drivers still on the circuit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference is, of course, I know what you're getting at is smaller than
way smaller
than we think.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, how did that get in your head? How did it get in your head that you were like so far from the reach is like that's required to be, you know, doing this sustainably and, you know, awesomely and doing the radical stuff that you want to be doing?
Yeah. I think a lot of that comes from the mentality and the persona that the people that I revere is so far away from me, come to the table, bring to the table. And it's, they're so confident and they have all this knowledge, and in your mind, they have all the knowledge.
Yeah. Magic amounts. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like the unicorn, you know, they're exactly. And so, I realize, of course, that comparing to that is difficult because all of the knowledge in the world about bass is still in the grand scheme of things, very little. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much unknown.
Exactly. Yeah. The ceiling right now is actually quite low. So like what I'm not saying is that like you're so far along that like you're nearly like nipping at our heels because like, but I am saying that like the gap is not that big because you have like entered the base of something that should be high, like, high order already, like to put it in like military terms, the best I can describe this is like, you are fresh out of boot camp as a Navy SEAL, right? And you're looking at like, how do I, compare to the like 20-year veterans who have just gotten out of the game, like the Trevor Thompsons. And it's like, okay, yeah, like that dude's got 20 years of experience of like murking people in the worst situations like imaginable, right? And you have not yet like come to that point, but you guys are both weapons, like serious weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that gap being where it is, really should like, it should give a greater picture as to who the real imposters are. Like, surely at the top of the game, there are some fucking geniuses. Like, my God, like some people who are just at every turn, like executing with such, like I couldn't spot the mistake if I tried, but I think there are an awful lot of imposters that are, siding up alongside those folks, which gives the impression that the ceiling is much higher than it actually is, rather than it being lower and there's just be some like stars out there.
Yeah. And that would change, everything in your mentality to see that you're not as far away as you think from that level.
Yeah. And I think like certainly you shouldn't stop pushing. Like when you get to that level, my suggestion, my advice is that like you need to set your eyes past like the best that you're seeing out here, because like you're going to catch up to them quicker than you think. And then you're going to be looking around like, oh my God, wait a second. We're doing what now with who now? And people know what now? No, bro, it's going to work out. It's going to work out just fine. It's always worked out. And that's just the way we've always done it.
I'm sure those people also plateau at some point because they never thought to look higher, and they got to that level and started ripping with those people and thought, all right, this is it. Like this is.
Yeah. So, okay. You've been in Moab for 2 years. You've seen a whole lot of seasons where people have been doing some wild stuff. Like 2022 was probably the wildest season that I have ever seen in Moab, to date, period, end of story, like full stop.
I think that shaped my bass journey quite a bit because I came back, like I said, with 25, 30 something jumps. And I only did 8 jumps during the last bit of Turkey Boogie, but I was on loads. I was doing days where I did 4 jumps in one day and there was a cliff strike on every single load that I was on. And there was plus 20 people on every single load. And it was just mayhem. I've seen what I thought was people going in within a month of starting my bass journey. And so I think that was huge in my decision making and my risk taking, was just, watching people pretty much die so early on.
I think that definitely folds into the experience bucket. Like if you've seen things go wrong, like if you've never seen anything go wrong, you are missing a substantial percentage of experience. What did that end up doing as far as the shape? Like, you came in with some maybe starry eyes, and then all of a sudden this happens. How do you adjust your behavior or your stoke?
Honestly, I think it was a bit jarring because, I was fresh, I was new, and at that stage, you're trying to pick up everything around you. You're trying to learn as much as you can, and you're in these groups and you're in these group dynamics. And in Moab, in particular during Turkey Boogie, and obviously seeing those cliff strikes so early and seeing all the group dynamics and people that have been around longer and seen some shit, the culture of desensitization took over very quickly. And I saw that happening. And that's what I learned. I learned to just, everybody still jokes about it and it's all still funny even right after the fact. I mean, the most memorable incident was a girl that ran off of Mary's, and I was in a truck full of 20 something base jumpers driving back up.
Yeah, bumping.
And we paused to watch, like, oh, they're going to do something sick. Do a flip. Well, she does a flip and she doesn't make it all the way around and stalls on her back, pitches through her legs. Gnarly scene, hits the wall a bunch, lands on the talus. And first off, I've never seen a group of base jumpers so excited to press their brand new in reach button before. They were all like, is it time?
God.
Like, are we doing that? But second, she got up so quickly. Her partner, scrambled up the talus to her. She hiked down, and from that night or from that day, I just remember packing in the parking lot, just kind of stunned after that, and kind of talking through it with some friends. And one of them turning to me and going, she's right behind you, right? And I was like, what? And I turn around and she's just like on one hip, hanging out, chatting,
Brimming.
And I don't know. I know now that was part of, a trauma response. Like, I'm sure you just experienced something insane. But to me, seeing that in that moment as a fresh base jumper after what I thought was, a death was wild. And I still carry that to this day, just that the nonchalance and the casualness of everything. And even since then, everybody talking about going in and all the jokes about it. And I'm super guilty of that. I love making, death jokes and all of that. But that culture of desensitization kind of almost told me to push down the emotional side of base jumping and the growth and progression that you need to handle these things and to handle these intense traumas, and watching and, worrying about your average mountain biker doesn't see your friends go off on a trail on a Sunday afternoon and think, all right, what time are they going to be back? Like, I need to know exactly what time they're going to be there, be back. Like, I need to be ready if something happens. And I think that takes a huge toll on a person.
Yeah.
And that shut me down a bit. And I fell into that desensitization culture and realized that that's not sustainable, and that I can't just not feel things and push them down and expect that everybody is existing in this, surface world where we're all fine and we're all making jokes, and base jumping is just another sport, and like everybody talks down on it like it's so dangerous, but we're like, no, it's
Right.
There's only so much risk.
100%. You need your emotions. You need to be sharp. I mean, like, a lot of the stuff that we do is so intuitive that if your like emotions are suppressed and they're not firing on all cylinders, man, you can make, critical errors in the worst possible time and just not even be able to recover. So 100%, I agree with you that the emotional side is necessary. And it is interesting to look at like how people respond to those traumas. I imagine that the people watching that were more traumatized than her, because you all saw like somebody nearly die, whereas she did not experience it that way.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, all she experienced was a terrifying, series of events that landed with her like completely fine. And in those moments, like, your brain really does like shut down, doesn't process the outer rim of anything or conceptualize or consider the consequences. It's just pure operation, narrow focused vision. And then all of a sudden, boom, we call that in like psychological terms, sensory overload.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
404 error, not computing.
And, thing on that, she, I think, took a really big nap and got her turn rig out, because of course the rig she had was completely shredded, and went back out and jumped it right after. And it was just a very much so a let's get back on the horse right away mentality. And I'm not judging that at all, but my experience watching that was it was a huge learning experience that taught me, without realizing that I was learning that's what you should be doing. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories like that where the jumper got into a gnarly accident and wanted to go right back up just to prove like my mentality, I'll be okay. And of course everybody's different, but I never quite fully processed that that's how I expected myself, like after seeing that's how I expected myself to react as the passerby. Like, I watched it. I need to follow her lead. I need to follow everybody else's lead around me, and everybody else is just jumping like
No big deal.
No big deal.
Yeah.
And I think 3 weeks ago, I watched a good friend I thought I watched him die in front of me. And people went back out and they were jumping super quick, and good on them. That, a lot of people didn't see it, truthfully.
Yeah.
We were big multi-way and everybody was focused on their own jumps. But for me, I kind of had to force myself to take a step back and go, what are my hesitations here? Why am I guilting myself for not wanting to jump? Like, I should just be fine. Like, I'm totally fine. I walked down from my exit that day. And
why is that a difficult thing to reconcile, that like you would rather not jump in a scenario like that? And real quick, just to touch on this one, this was like a very similar type of incident where the person went bouncing down the wall after a 180, but instead of landing without consequence at the bottom, they had like serious and like, medically critical injuries, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is the longest laundry list I've ever seen of complications from that.
Right. Like helicopter rescue immediately.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why question yourself on not wanting to just like go huck it?
I think because you hear, this is a really passionate sport. A lot of the people in it are, you have to, theoretically, you have to be extremely passionate about. This has to be worth your life.
Yep.
In a lot of instances. And so the whole point of this is like, you're doing it because it's worth everything. And the moment that changes, the imposter syndrome creeps back in, or the moment that you want to take a step back for a moment, that imposter syndrome creeps in and you're like, this is something that should be my life. This is like the biggest passion ever. The fact that I'm slowing down a bit after seeing something traumatic, like, are other people going to see me as somebody that isn't in it for the long term? Or how am I going to be viewed? And how am I, more importantly, going to view myself in my journey and base? And so, the insecurities creep in of if seeing a friend like this pretty much almost go in affects you this much, like it didn't even happen to you, it didn't happen to your best friend, what does that mean for
what
your
are you made
passion?
of?
Yeah. Like, is this really worth it to you? And I know when I'm standing up on that exit, it is every time 100% worth it. I am so excited to get off that thing, whatever it is. But those moments creep in and you have to start to question, because for me, the experience of base jumping and the lifestyle that it brings, you should constantly be questioning why you're doing it.
100%.
And you should always know, or at least always want to know and want to learn, why am I here?
Yeah, I think that was one of my favorite answers in any interview that I've done so far. I asked John McAvoy why he jumped, and he answered something to the tune of, I figure that out every single time I do, and then I don't jump, and then I come up with a new reason, and I'm back out there. And I agree with you that like somewhat you are testing your preparedness to be a jumper through how you like interact. But I think the thing that I've learned over the years is like, that only really is the case. Like, it's only really a test piece if everything lines up. Like, if you end up out at the exit point and the weather is great and you came out to do a great jump and your energy is high and your emotions are steady and like, all this stuff lines up, and then you look at the jump and you're like, oof, you know what? I don't really like this anymore. Then it's like, okay, maybe this isn't for you anymore, or at all. Absolutely. Versus like if something happens, like somebody nearly dies in front of you, to be also pushing past that moment saying like, well, I'm not affected by that at all. So like, why would I care? I think is not respecting the fact that like somebody dying in front of you should affect your emotions in a way that should reduce your capacity to be able to execute in the base environment. And it's totally acceptable and probably like, warranted. I don't know how strongly I can push this one for people to, respect that fact and not jump.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like Man, that was some of the first advice I was ever given by Matt Gerdes coming up in the game when I was a base jumper. And he said, protect yourself at all times because there are so many people that have seen so much happen that they just won't care to. And that speaks to that desensitization that like is almost imbued in our culture and then forced upon everybody coming up. You shouldn't care. Like if you care, then like, why are you even here?
Yeah. Yeah. Like if this affected you so much,
Yeah. And then like my retort to that is like, well, but I don't want to die doing this. And so like, people dying is going to affect me. My own death is going to affect me. I'd rather like stay on the right side of the dirt. And so when I think that's a potential, or even when like my emotions are heightened from that like happening right in front of me, I don't really want it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been struggling with that a lot the last few weeks. I've only done one jump since that day, and I went back intentionally with the people that I was with that day and jumped the same exit because I was on Cactus Jack. I mean, toes over the edge, tied into my static line, like waiting for the go signal. And so I very easily could have in that moment said, oh, fuck it, I'm still going to jump. Like I'm tied in, it'll get me down faster. I could come up with a million reasons that would ease my conscience of just getting down because I had the gozies.
Yeah. Okay, so I got a story for you on that same front. I was in San Diego, and I can't give you the details on the object for obvious reasons on this recording, but I can tell you that the object that we jumped was quite difficult to get on top of. Very, very difficult. And I was with my buddy Ian Flanders and another jumper, Graham Dickinson, who, if you know him, shout out to Graham, pour one out. And we were jumping this corner, and he goes for something that he had not planned, not talked about, double gainer, just hucking it, literally hucking it, right? And he pitches his pilot chute maybe like 1.5 rotations through. It comes like through his legs, through his arms. He kind of does like one of these like pole dancer routines around the bridle that's like being elongated. And then like he's facing the object, but then his parachute opens 180 degrees the other way, right? And just kind of like whacks him into the perfect place to like land, right? And he was like hung up in his system for a good 1.5 seconds. And the whole time me and Ian are looking at this like frozen, because like in our heads, like he's dead. Like right now he's more dead than alive, like definitely more dead. Like anything, he's got to make several quick, educated, precise, aggressive decisions all in the right time and moment, or like he's goner, right? And then boom, back to life. And we both looked at that, just like caught our breath for a second, thought about jumping, and then quickly just started taking our gear off without saying a damn word. We're just like taking our gear off, going like, this is going to be an absolute bitch to like go down off of this object. Like we're going to have to do almost exactly what we did to come up here to get down, and holy crap. Mm-hmm. But nah, man, that was nah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And similarly, like when we got to the bottom, like Graham like was just all smiles and laughs and like no awareness that like this went wrong at all, like that was sick, guys. Oh my God, that was so rad. Did you see that? And we're just like, yeah, we saw that. What? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then in your mind, that's the person that almost went in and they're fine. So,
right.
Your psyche wants to be like, well, why should I be not okay with this? Like they're fine.
Exactly. Yeah. And what I think both of us have come to realize is that like fine is not fine. That's a huge defense mechanism for what arguably is one of the more traumatic events that one can go through. I think that when we were talking in the park, you had kind of an idea or a sentiment about that, about what it's like to be the person that nearly goes in, and what that does as far as like, necessary processing.
No, I don't remember. What
you don't remember? About? We were talking about this very incident, like the incident that you had witnessed, and then, the apparent lack of awareness understanding that this person had after the fact.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like going like, well, are they just like, are they crazy? Are they insane?
Yeah.
And turns out like, no, like those people aren't insane. They've just been traumatized heavily.
Yeah. That emotional side of it is scary to watch somebody go through. And you want to hope that they take the right things out of very scary situations. But how do you even approach that when you see something really spooky happen and they might not even... I mean, it's almost more traumatic to watch somebody fuck up in that way and not have any clue or even, I mean, different in your case. Like, I'm sure once you realized what happened, it was a bit spooky, but seeing people that almost go in and have no awareness of it and no willingness to change or to like listen, at least.
Yeah. Where do you think that comes from? Like
probably the ego. They don't want somebody to tell them that they're wrong, that they don't know what they're doing, that they're not supposed to be there. Maybe they have imposter syndrome and they're afraid that they're going to be found out, that they weren't ready. And so they have to make their voice louder and be more confident, because confidence is key.
So this is just a flex move, basically.
Almost. Yeah. Like you could imagine a trauma response if they knew what happened, if they were truly aware of how close they were to the edge.
Yeah. See, I think it's a lot to do with that. And it's a lot to do with facing up to that reality. Like imagine that, well, not just imagine, this actually does happen. Whenever you go through like an experience like that, you still carry the trauma associated with it, whether you acknowledge it or not. Like your body goes through that emotional experience in full technicolor. But at the time, like your vision gets narrowed to like just the operational points. And so like immediately following one of those experiences, like you basically shut down all of those like, forefront conscious awarenesses. And so it might look, initially on the surface, just like no problem at all.
Absolutely.
But like all of those, underlying emotions have still been experienced in that terror and that trauma. And so when people start to poke at it and say like, hey, like this is how this actually happened, then you have to like also in conjunction with like admitting that, deal with the commensurate emotional exchange.
It's a much bigger
it's a heavy lift.
Yeah. Than just accepting that or listening to somebody who might be telling you that you're wrong or that there's something that you could do better.
Right. And I think a lot of times people approach that like very nonchalantly, and they should do it very delicately. Like you can't just come up to somebody and be like, hey, did you realize that you almost fucking killed yourself right there? Yeah.
Yep. You can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, like, take the edge off just a little bit,
Yeah.
Like, how did you view that?
And that, that goes in conjunction with like how we learn to bass jump. In a perfect world, this information's so perfect. They're so important that everybody is going to learn a different way, and everybody needs a different type of mentor. And in the same way, dealing with really sensitive topics like that, you're going to have to approach it differently with everybody. So then you have an issue with people that regard themselves as mentors and teachers in the sport, where they want to get the information out there, but the best way is different for everybody. And so coming to somebody and saying, you fucked up.
Yeah. Counterproductive.
Really difficult. Really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of the crux of the problem right now when it comes to education. There are a fair amount of people that know how to bass jump, but there are not very many people that know how to communicate how to bass jump. Mm-hmm. And so we have this like constant at odds, type of culture where like my generation is speaking to your generation, and we're just like losing the battle because of just basic communication differences, like speaking the wrong emotional language, saying things at the wrong time in the wrong tone,
Yeah.
in the wrong way to like get somebody to actually receive and understand, right? Like maybe we're not even articulating the point well. It's just like raving lunatics like, oh my God, did you just see the word someone? And like from your side, you're like, what is this guy yammering about? Like this is anyone seeing this guy? Like what is happening here?
Yeah. It's a different language.
Yeah.
And then, you don't respect as much what they're saying because
you can't even understand it. Yeah.
You have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Oh my God, man. Like I just landed and this person is raving and yelling and his hands are up in the air and like,
I'm just stoked, man.
Yeah. Are you okay? This guy okay? You okay? You want some water?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to dive into that with you. I felt like you took a stronger position the first time we talked about the, trauma of living through nearly killing yourself compared to the trauma of seeing somebody almost die or seeing somebody die.
I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit, but it's really, you experience more by watching that whole thing.
Yeah.
But
which do you think is overall more traumatic, more like of an effect on who you are as a person and how you operate specifically in the bass environment? Like, is it like in the people that you've witnessed, like are more people off the deep end after seeing somebody nearly go in, or off the deep end after nearly going in themselves?
I mean, I've only experienced one side of that teeter-totter. I have not
Nearly killed yourself.
Nearly killed myself. Thank God. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, seriously.
Yet.
Thank God. Fingers crossed. I do not wish that on you. Coming from that side of experience, I can tell you it's gnarly. And I think it's one of the things that's heavily discounted amongst people who are in the intermediate level of bass jumping, who haven't experienced that yet, which are getting into things that are now like going to take them pretty close to it, or at least like an order of magnitude closer than they've been.
Yeah. The statistics change a lot when you get to this intermediate range. You're far more susceptible, I think, to that happening.
Right. So let me ask you this. When it comes to sport, where did you learn your processing and reflection skills? Is that something you picked up in previous activities, or was that something that you learned once you got into Sky Sports?
I think Sky Sports definitely catapulted that. None of the other sports or activities that I was in had so much death and so much serious consequence. I mean, skiing, yes, climbing, yes, but I wasn't doing those to the level that would produce such consequences, I think. And I think that of all of the communities I've been in, my friends and the people I'm around in bass jumping, it seems like they are all very open and very willing to hold space for emotions. And a lot of them have learned that along the way. And I always am greeted with very gentle responses when I mention hesitancy or any like, oh, I don't know, I'm not having the best mental day. This might not be the best idea. Like nobody's ever going to push me to do something that I'm not mentally there for yet. But I think we're doing a terrible job as a community of preparing people emotionally for the sport. I mean, you have mentors and teachers that don't touch on the trauma and emotional response side of it at all. And then you have teachers that, day one, you're writing a letter to all your family telling you that you're dead.
Yeah.
And those are the experiences that I've seen with people teaching, the mental side of it.
Yeah.
And that's scary. And I don't feel like I got a very well-rounded education on how to mentally handle the sport.
Gotcha.
And the progression and the everything that happens in between.
Well, let's go through that one real quick, because I think that's a huge one for me when somebody's coming up, and we might be able to just touch on it real quick and kind of do a touch and go on that concept and how to start to learn it. I think processing is a really important thing to do. And I think first it takes time, and the time that I think that you need to take is right after the incident. If you're okay, so like this all starts way back when you're not doing anything that's super dangerous, but might see sensory overload anyway. It happens all the time on a first jump course where somebody will jump and we'll get to the bottom and everyone is woohooing and it all went great. Right. And then, I ask like, hey, how did that joke go for you? And they're like, I have no idea. And you're like, wait. What do you mean? You did the whole thing. Like I saw you like, doing the toggles and flaring the thing and like running out. What do you mean you don't know? And they're like, well, like, like I jumped off and then like some stuff happened. And then like all of a sudden I was like on the ground and that was that.
That's a terrifying response.
Right. It's a terrifying response, but it is something that happens to people that have not mentally prepared for that moment. It doesn't happen often, but that's the first like moments that you get to teach people processing. And that can happen in like, it should happen. Caveat, this should happen in previous experiences that are less consequential. Skydiving, rock climbing, stuff that's got some consequence, but like not that that's going to kill you. And similar flow, I'm just putting it in base jumping terms because I think more people will understand it. Once we're there, the first mode of operation is to take your time and not do anything else just yet.
Mm-hmm.
And see if you can reconstruct what happened standing in that exact context, looking back at the thing that you just did, potentially giving your mind just a little bit of time to catch up with your body. Right. Because basically like what happened is you left it behind. Body went this way. Mind was still like, whoa, no.
Shut down.
And then, all of a sudden. Yeah. And then so like it's, time crunched back there, just waiting for a little bit to come back in context and then trying to systematically recall the finer points of what happened. You know that you jumped off. Okay. What happened next? And then trying to go through not only what happened next, but how you felt about what happened. Maybe it was a certain point at which like everything started going too fast. Maybe it was a steady, like, that was happening since you started walking out to the bridge. And then all of a sudden it like, that was the last straw on the camel's back when you jumped off. But either way, like tracking that emotional arc is the next step to like fully processing the thing. Right.
Yeah.
So those things, I can also say that what commonly happens here that is incorrect is to go right to either somebody that's observed telling the person what happened or actually looking at video of it happening, which like, that's the objective of it. But that's basically cheating yourself out of learning how to process.
Yeah.
That's like, just shoving the reality in your face, which like we described earlier, it's on video, like it might be slightly skewed of like what actually occurred.
Absolutely.
And so like, I think that going through that process from an early stage before you're in highly consequential environments, and then every time that happens to you with some like, obviously this is just a touch and go, steps on top of that to fully process the event.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how you start addressing it.
Yeah. And I mean, God, if I had known that 2 years ago, my progression might have gone a lot different. You just don't.
Yeah. And if I had learned that early enough on, I would have saved myself a lot of trouble too, because like, man, there are so many times where that's happened and, I haven't fully faced up to it. And so like, man, I didn't get the actual lesson out of it. And ultimately again, right back in the same spot.
Yeah. And it's, it's also scary. Like you don't want to accept that you have no idea what just happened when you were hurtling your body towards the earth. Like you don't quite want to think that you blacked out for that moment. And so seeing the video and be like, oh yeah, I remember, like it's fine.
Of course,
and
yeah.
you're just like pushing it down and going back up to jump because everything's fine. Like it's
Right.
fine. I'll just do another jump and push that one out of the way. Like,
right. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest elements of this is the inherent lack of trust that comes out of an incident like that, because you blacked out and you're like, oh my God, what does that mean for me? Like, can I trust myself in this environment anymore?
Yeah.
Like if I'm not aware of all of this, I could just do randomness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like, I think the next step to teaching people how to like, effectively train for base jumping is like, once you process it, then what's the game plan next to like rebuild that trust?
Yeah.
If you don't do that in a systematic way, then like you are truly untrustworthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To yourself, which is the worst.
The worst.
The worst kind.
Yeah. The worst kind. Yeah, man.
You're just flailing out in space with no grounding.
So I think this is an appropriate time to start talking about how to reach people. And maybe I can start with saying like, why didn't you come up in the game and just do everything wrong? Like, you definitely could have. I saw you from the very beginning. You're an incredibly talented athlete who has multi-sport like disciplines under her belt. Like, you've got great people around you. You've got talent. Like, you could have gone from championship Formula 3 season directly into Formula 1 if you wanted to, you know? And I'm not saying like that's a good idea. I'm just saying that like you could have succeeded, but you chose not to. Why didn't you do that?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is when I started base jumping, I kind of, honestly, I don't know if I'd recommend this, but I overloaded myself with a bunch of other things. In the same 6 months that I started base jumping, I started wingsuiting, I started speed flying, I started paragliding, and I started kiteboarding. And in my head just decided, all right, I'm going to progress at all of these things a little slower because I want to do them all. My ADHD brain just won't let me sit down to one. So I think if I had chosen to just go straight to base and put all of my energy into base, I could have been so gung-ho and made so many poor decisions. But my basket was full. I mean, I was doing so many other things that inevitably my progression was slower because it had to be. There's not enough time in the world.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it. I think another part of it would be the people that I surrounded myself with in the beginning and the experiences that they shared, that they either were trying to impart on me what not to do, and I was close enough with them to feel the residual trauma of their fuck ups, you know.
Okay, we got a shout out to make then?
No. No. But that, you know, as well as seeing the potential. And I guess the biggest thing was the sustainability. Like, I really, truly want and had to recognize this in myself. I want to be doing this for a long time. I don't want to be the best in, like, my goal is not to surpass everyone and be the best and have the recognition and all of that and do the thing that's never been done before. My goal is to exist as long as I can doing the things that I love. And that inherently will slow you down quite a bit and at least make you question. And my brain is, you know, a very ADHD brain, a very OCD brain. Yeah. And that aspect of it always has me questioning. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. And I've got to find personally for me the mix of, is this my OCD anxious brain talking about factors that, you know, my logic brain can know and logic myself out of, or is this a bad feeling about a jump that I really should be listening to? You don't know. So my OCD was a big factor in that as well, of just always second guessing, always questioning, always wondering, like, what if, and fantasizing all of the outcomes had things been different or I had made a different decision. And so I think that in itself stopped me from just being extremely reckless, because I also know that I get up to the top and I look over the edge, and yeah, there's fear, there's a little anxiety, but there is so much stoke that could override any logic of just like, let me sprint off this thing now. Like, I'm always going to want to be one of the first to go. And I think that saved me a lot of, you know, being too gung-ho for my own good and too quick and learning things without properly processing them.
Yeah. See, I think that's properly aligned emotional response. Like, we give kind of shade to anxiety all over the place, but anxiety is a human emotion that is highly relevant in base jumping. You know, like kind of basically, like, anxiety in my book is an emotion that calls attention to the fact that you are in a dangerous or unsafe or somehow, challenging environment. Let's put it that way, you know, and the less challenging or the less dangerous or the more safe it becomes, the less anxiety you have. Right. And so it's totally reasonable for me to like say like, yeah, you should be feeling anxious early on in your career. There's so many unknowns, there's so many things that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear you say that like your anxiety then drove you to know these things a little deeper by questioning all of it. Like that seems like the perfect road from anxiety to success. Like rather than like, again, blocking that out and going like, well, I'm just going to try and like flex on anxiety and cruise.
Yeah. And I think, if I could control or have advice, like you mentioned before, you asked me if I had started that path of learning emotional maturity and just processing before I got into parachutes, or if that's something that came after. And I think even if you do have a lot of those skills, coming into base jumping, it felt like it scrambled my brain, and I needed to relearn, because you go to a normal average therapist or you talk to your friends and your understanding of anxiety is, yes, we are no longer being hunted, and, we're no longer searching for ways to survive in the world. Like we are a elevated species, that these are residual things from survival that we don't quite need. Well, now you enter a base environment where you kind of need it, it's kind of legitimate. So you're told your whole life, like, not that these anxieties aren't valid, but they're coming from a place that you are no longer in, and you're starting base jumping, putting yourself in that place again. And so talking to anybody else about it and learning that emotional maturity outside of parachutes doesn't really apply, because you got to talk to somebody that's also dealing with that anxiety on the edge of the cliff, saying, all right, now we have to pick apart what's valid and what
is irrational.
Yeah. Totally. And that completely changes when you enter the parachute world.
Yeah, because turns out like almost every emotion you have in that environment is rational.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly.
Okay, that's wonderful. I love that aspect of this conversation. I'm kind of curious to dive back into something you said just a second ago about your mentor and how like you learned from his mistakes. And this is something that I think in our culture currently gets a lot of flack. Like if you do something wrong and then you eventually call somebody out for doing the same wrongness, let's just not address what is wrong and right, but kind of, okay, like let's just agree that like that's a spurious term, whatever, but like if there is a wrong and somebody did something wrong and now they're trying to woe bro somebody coming up, they usually get called out for being a fucking hypocrite. Like, how dare you tell me to do it this way? Like, you did the exact same thing, and now you're sitting here in front of me just totally fine telling me not to do the thing that you did? What the hell? Yeah. So how did you not fall into that category?
I think for me, it's a little bit more personal answer than your average, because I don't know if I would call this person specifically my mentor, but he was my partner, and that was no longer a whoa, bro, don't do this. I know I did it. It was looking at somebody that you deeply care about and have intertwined your life with and hold a little bit of identity with, saying these things. And so for me, it held a lot more weight, because that person to me was almost an extension of myself at that point. And so to see them go through that pattern and learn the hard way, all of these things hit me a lot harder, and I think than your average teacher, mentor would a student telling them not to do the thing that exactly they did, like
inescapable that they cared about you.
Yeah. And so that, coming at it with that lens, it was a lot more gentle, and it was a lot less like, and I will say my tendency is to push back. My father is a lawyer. He is very black and white, wants to argue. My dopamine comes from arguing constantly. I love it. As much as I don't want to.
Me too. I was raised by an attorney too. High five on that one. It was, dude, debate is healthy. Yeah, let's get it. Yeah.
But I, trying to think about it, I'm not sure exactly what, and in the moment I might have had a similar response of like, whoa, but you did it. Like, you did it. So and that's how I got into speed flying, is that person taught me how to speed fly, and he taught himself. And it was just like, oh, well, I can just do this. Like, I don't need a ton. And so there was absolutely pushback. I'm not saying that I heard that and just like
Accepted
melted
wholesale,
into it.
yeah.
Yeah. I was like, all right, I'm just going to go this route. Like there were a lot of talks about it, and there was a lot of seeing how it affected them and where they're at with their progression now, and seeing how much I respected the mentality that they carried out of their progression.
Yeah.
And seeing like their end result is what I want to get to. I don't have to go through all of these things that they went through to get there. If I can just for one moment be silent and listen, really listen, without the ego, without the I can do better, I can do different.
Right.
So
I'm curious to get your opinion on the opposite type of thing, where somebody has not made that mistake and then comes to you as you're crushing, you know, and says, "Whoa, bro." Like, what do you make of that in comparison?
absolutely. I think that person should, you should respect them. Like they have done theoretically everything right to avoid that. But I mean, everybody's going to be different. Some people are going to only be able to learn from fucking up.
Yeah.
In, lack of a better word. Like they will not be able to look somebody in the eyes, hear something that is against what they have already created in their head, and not still just go off and do what they were going to do in the beginning. And so seeing somebody that hasn't made that mistake trying to impart to somebody else, obviously it's always going to depend on the person, but you can't win. It holds, you want to think it holds less weight because they didn't experience that. How would they know? Like, oh, maybe their friend, maybe they're close to somebody, but your initial thought is, oh, well, how would you know?
Yeah. See, that's where I kind of have questions, like, let me put it a more definitively. Somebody giving you a whoa bro speech on the like cutting edge that you're on, who has chosen to not approach that cutting edge, like you're doing something that they have chosen is too risky for them, but they are like also advising you on the right or wrongness of what you're doing. Super stoked
to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue there for me is that person who's coming to you not giving the time and space to understand where you're at. Because if they were genuinely trying to impart knowledge on you to better the sport, the community, they don't want to see you go in, whatever it is, you would hope that they would want to give the proper time to listening to where you're at before they come with this barreling in. Yeah. But a lot of the times you see those people that haven't approached that edge, but have a lot to say about it, coming in hot with the ego and with just so much to say, because they want to hear themselves talk, or they want to have the guise of being the hero and the person that's going to change everything, and they didn't get there. And so what are you competition to them? Are you, what are they benefiting? What are they getting out of coming to you with this? And I think if you understand that and it aligns with where you're at, it could be really helpful. And if they're coming at you with, the intent of ego and just hearing their own voice, like that does come across really quickly.
So I know that you've got a fair amount of experience with both sides of things. I'm curious to ask you like how you've received various approaches, and if you've got any, conclusions or ideas about how we improve the approach overall.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is how similar, and I'm sure how many parallels that everybody can draw from this conversation of how do we impart this knowledge on the younger generation, the next generation, and in life, like all of, the boomers versus the millennials versus the Gen Z, like we have lived it. We have made mistakes. We want to impart to you guys that you can learn from these without the consequences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I also see in that same light, the tone that it's being taken with is less respect for the work that that person has done or the place that they're in currently. Like I think about the whole Tide Pod debacle, you know, where all these boomers and dude, I didn't even know until not that long ago that the whole, you know, Gen Z's eating Tide Pods,
Yeah,
like this
what
whole
the hell?
forbidden fruit was a joke and a jab at the older generations.
Yeah.
And that like these generations won't listen to us. They don't even think, like, they think that we're actually going to sit here and pop these Tide Pods because of course they do look delicious, you know, like,
right.
they
Yeah.
really do. And
Good
knowing
troll.
that and thinking like, oh wow, so we're coming at these conversations with the same distance between me and you that I explained earlier, this magical, like, I'm so much farther, like I've experienced so many more things, et cetera, that automatically puts that person below us in a much smaller position and doesn't really give them the respect and the time of day that they deserve as their own humans. You know, they're not just extreme beginners in this sport. They're people that have lived full lives and that have a ton of other experiences that could help and bring to the table. And I think all anybody ever wants is to be validated.
Yeah.
And so hearing somebody come to you and just start spewing because, you know, they have good intentions and they care and they really want to see they want to see this sport and this community grow and progress.
And not lose so many people.
And not, like, you know, we're all tired of watching all of our friends go in. Like the intent is very pure and very good. But if you don't start by recognizing where each individual person is at already, you make them feel invalidated. And the second they feel like they've been put in an inferior position, like they are,
they balk.
like
Yep.
there's a magic, you know, cloud in between you two that you can't quantify and that you can't express, it's going to be way denser. It's going to be way more difficult to get through to them because you're treating them almost like a child, because they are. I mean, in aspect, they are a child in the base world. Like they don't, they are teeny tiny babies. They don't know anything. They jump off bridge. It goes well. Yay. You know?
I mean, I think we're all are, and I don't take it as a knock. Like, I think we're a very childish community, and I love that about us. Like, we're like, you know, experiencing this like inner childlike wonderment of flight, you know, like everything that every third grade teacher told us wasn't possible. And now here we are. What's up? You know, Mrs. Toland. What would I do if
anything.
Exactly. My friends jumped off a cliff and I did too.
Suck it.
So, okay, it sounds like the first step then is, you know, trying to meet somebody where they're at and respect that, like, it's maybe like higher than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
You know, so does it like soften the blow when I approach you and say like, hey, look, okay, I saw what you just did. Let's start here. You're a Formula 3 driver. I'm a Formula 1 driver.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just start there. You're an incredible athlete, right? Obviously, you would have to be. Yeah. Because like if you weren't, you'd certainly be dead.
Yeah.
And then we go from there.
Yeah, and I think this is something that a lot of people already know, and that you, I think, especially are very good at, is at the very beginning, you're not spewing knowledge, you're asking questions. You're getting as much of a feel for where they're at as you can. You're asking, instead of, oh my God, I watched you almost just go in, what the hell happened?
Right.
It's, hey, how did that jump go for you? You know, where, like, don't include, you know, you're not
trying to trauma dump on people.
Exactly. Yeah. Because also, you know, you're maybe not acknowledging how traumatic watching somebody watching somebody fuck up that hard.
Right.
Like, you might not be, like we talked about, processing that. And so you coming to them with the best intentions, like, you know, I watched my friend die this way. I almost watched you die this way. I don't want to watch you die this way. Is just trauma dumping on them and exploding onto, you have no idea what you're exploding onto. You don't have no idea the canvas that's in front of you and what they've experienced. And so asking them and really, really sitting down and getting a feel for where they're at and how they felt about whatever it is you're talking about, I'd say would be step number one.
Yeah, man.
And then explaining, the
nuances.
Yeah, all the race car driver stuff and all that, like.
Man, I lived that exact experience the other day. I was at the bridge, and a group of us were watching a class that had already graduated. Like, they had come off their jump course and now they're practicing stuff. And this jumper goes to do a rear floater, which they like understood in concept, I believe. Like, they had like been explained the theory of it, but not so much like taught the proper mechanics to it. And so they just push off the bridge super hard, go like immediately head down, and then do like the worst possible things. Like, they start kicking their legs and arms, flailing, and then pitch the pilot chute right into that. And, for a good second and a half, they kicked their bridle into a half hitch around their foot, which, like, from my perspective, that's exactly how I watched, I've watched people go in. I've watched my best friend go in just doing that, and she eventually made it out of it, like just miracle kicked the way out of that like pilot chute bridle entanglement, and then boom, opened. Right. And so like I recognized immediately that like my perspective on this incident was like informed by actually watching that go the full Monty.
Yeah.
Right. So like totally inappropriate. Like, if for me to bring that to the table, like that's heinous,
Yeah.
like, like, hey, I don't want to bug you, but here's this like traumatic experience that like came out of what you just did. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So like, I totally agree with you. I think like oftentimes we are unaware of like the baggage that we're carrying. And then when somebody like invigorates that baggage, it's easy and also unacceptable to like just toss that bag at them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's your bag, that's not.
Right. Like, at the very like most, like what I would say is appropriate is like, having that conversation, like we said. And then when we get to the end of the conversation, going like, hey, so like, not for nothing, but like there's a bag here on the floor. And if you want to pick through it, like you can. Yep. It's got a story about what just happened here, and it didn't work out the way that it just did for you.
Yeah. Giving them the opportunity to choose. Right.
Yeah. So what else is there in terms of reaching the next generation of jumper, your generation of jumper, the ones that are, now coming to the most dangerous part, of the progression, so to speak? We've got respect. We've got like meeting somebody where they're at. I also oftentimes find that like in trying to approach people, I am fighting a huge tide when it comes to what you have experienced thus far. Maybe you can start with some of the like experiences that you've had that shut down these conversations before they even happen.
With people trying to give advice or help you learn from something.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I've had plenty of experiences as a woman in all of these sports as well. People I feel like we're so much more approachable, and like we are always going to be so grateful to hear from them, and that we always are looking for that advice and that beta, and that their word is always so valuable. And I think my experience is just kind of what I warned about before, is people not asking, not having the wherewithal to get an idea of where I was at in the situation before they came in hot. Like, I had told you before, I had made a Instagram post of a speed riding video, and this was I think my second speed riding mission, second like speed flight. I started on skis and then moved to foot launching. Anyways, I had this flight. I was super stoked on it. I realized, I got down, shared the stoke, and then I went home and watched that video 50 times. I talked with my partner who taught me, and we went through and was like, all right, here's what we could do better next time. And like, you landed safely, you did great, but there's things to learn from this. And I knew that from the start. This was my second flight, And so I post the video, and I always get really anxious about social media and posting on Instagram because everybody wants to post their best version. And I obviously want to post all these cool things that I'm doing and share with my friends, but I obviously you want it to look good. The ego side of it is there, but I also recognize that I'm posting these things to look back at my own progression as well. And I'm posting them as a beginner. And so I posted this video and had the caption like, hey, look, first ride, whatever, had so much fun. Also, PSA, I know I am a beginner. I am very new at this. Like, there are things that I watched in this video that I laughed at and that I will learn heaps from. Yeah. All that being said, I'm doing the due diligence of learning from this. This is not a look how good I am video. This is I'm going to look back on this in a year and be like, holy, how far have I come, Yeah.
And
literally at the bottom, I think I put it in all caps, like, please no beta spraying. Because at that point, I had already experienced that so much on other videos of people sliding into the DMs like, hey, just so you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I got a good friend of mine sliding in that it honestly felt like they hadn't even read
yeah, well, I mean,
disclaimer.
A lot of people don't. Yeah, a lot of people don't.
Like, they're not going to read that caption.
TLDR, sorry.
Exactly. And gave me beta on something that they actually didn't have that much knowledge of. And I at the time I took it seriously and I was really anxious because of course you post something on Instagram, you don't want somebody to tell you you're bad, Like,
right.
I know I'm bad, but you can't say that.
Yeah.
And I took that to my partner and we had a long conversation about why what they said was not well informed enough, I guess, and not applicable to the situation. But I was very pissed off in the moment reading it because I thought I did everything that you're supposed to do to not get dudes in your DMs telling you what, like, telling you off.
You can't do anything to not get dudes in. You do anything on the internet.
And I've accepted that at this point.
Good,
but
bad,
back
or indifferent.
then, I was really pushing, like, controlling the crowds. And it frustrated me so much because this person didn't ask me enough questions, didn't really get a feel for where I was at, and didn't speed ride. They were very good at speed flying, but they didn't ski. And that was the biggest difference was, their experience. But for me, just having that person come in so hot and with so much ego immediately shuts it down. And you do not want to listen to anything they're having to say because they're not listening to you. Why would I listen to you if you're not going to hear me out and understand my experience? And that person didn't even go to read it was like 6 sentences. It wasn't like a giant whole thing before they shot into my DMs and started messaging me. Like, they didn't give the time of day to reading my experience with what I just did.
Yeah.
They just went straight into it. And I think that's the biggest overarching theme is it feels like you can tell when the ego takes over. And as a woman in the sport and in all of these sports, I am also very quick to assume that people's ego is what's driving them because I'm seeing so many people want to say something to you and want to explain their point of view, and it doesn't. And your point of view might be super valid and you might have things that would save my life in the future, but if you're coming at it with yourself in mind and not with the other person, they're not going to listen. And I in that moment, I did take seriously what he had to say. I mean, after the moment of who the fuck is this guy?
Sucker coming through.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, wait, this is somebody that loves and cares about me and I revere as a friend. Yeah. They're doing this for a reason. But the goal, I don't know, the goal in reaching people without pushing them away.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's so hard.
Yeah, and I can say that it's gotten increasingly tougher for me because, like, okay, let me give you an example. Like, I was trying to reach somebody the other day for something that I, like, actually was sent to me. At this point in my career, many people just send me, like, I'll get, like, the same video 10 times from 10 different people.
Send you the wayward jumpers.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, hey, fix this guy.
And I'm like, oh my God, okay, like I'll send it. You're right. Like this is
My
on the
responsibility
line.
in
Yeah,
this.
but like, hey, like now I know about it. So let me try and cold call this person. And especially with female jumpers, like the disclaimers that I have to go through in order to even open the door to the conversation are huge. Like I had to go through 2 days of back and forth just to like kind of, explain where I was even coming from in the first place, which I actually have a great email that I saved from Matt Gerdes like 10 years ago where he was told about one of our friends that was over the line. And, he wrote this lengthy and very, I don't know how to put it, very caring email about how he even was aware of the thing that was happening. And so I take parts of that and copy it in and go like, hey, this is exactly where I'm coming from, and why I'm even aware of this. But 2 days of disclaimers before we could even get to the point.
Yeah.
That's a stiff barrier to entry, especially if it's something that like is critically important, like now.
And if you're cold calling, I mean, you have to.
Right. You have to.
Yeah. To keep that person from getting defensive and shutting that barrier to knowledge is always going to be difficult. And that makes me think of the other side of it where we're racking our brains trying to figure out how to best communicate with these people. What if these people aren't going to be receptive? I mean, not these people. Like, what if there are people that they're not going to be receptive to what you have to say, and there's no changing their minds. And, of course, what's your responsibility in that? But also, you can't save everybody. Like there are people that are so aggressively in their heads that will not take advice from. Yeah. I mean, you could do 5 days of disclaimers. You could talk to them for months, and they're in their path. They're set in their ways. So then, how do you choose the people that are not worthy of that information that will actually listen? And then, of course, the people that will actually listen probably don't need it as much as the people that are so defensive and don't want to let themselves listen.
It's a difficult problem. And like for me, energetically speaking, and I think this works actually like as a meta strategy as well. I think like what I like to focus on are the people that are 99% understanding of what I understand. Right. Because that takes only 1% energy from me. Boom. They understand it. Now we're on the same team. Now we go. Yeah. Right. Now we go after the people who are 98% there. And I'm not talking like a philosophical understanding. I'm like talking about like mostly technical understanding of like, these are things that are, this is how this parachute actually works, versus like trying to go after the person who is intentionally like 180 degrees divided from us. They're at 1%. I've got to use 99% to like put that, and there's no guarantee that they're going to stay there. And so like, while they might need the help the most, they are also the least effective and efficient way to change culture overall, which is a sad thing to say because it's like, it's the opposite of the No Child Left Behind Act. Yeah. It's like, look, if we're going to make, year over year generational progress on this, then we've got to go center out.
I mean, I think the biggest issue with that is what is sustainable for you and for the people that are mentors and teachers and the generation above is not sustainable for like what the lower generation is learning. Like you will drive yourself into the ground trying to reach everybody. The people that need it the most, and everybody. And you have to, in that moment, you have to always choose yourself. And so you're not gonna get those people that need it the most all the time. You have to save yourself in that moment, and putting that much energy into something that is possibly not giving the return or not seeing, the reward of that is really difficult. And a lot of times those people don't want to listen. Like I know we talked about this in the park a little bit. A lot of bass is connected to your identity, and what you're learning in this sport that you're so passionate about becomes part of you and part of how you see the world. And so you have somebody come to you and tell you that that's not correct, or even that there's a different way to do it. There's a better way to do it. I feel like humans are pretty resistant to change, and you find something that's working for you and that you're confident in. Who is this rando that's shot into my DMs trying to tell me otherwise. Like they don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
And
I think knowing is a huge part of this, and it may be also another part of the strategy here that I've certainly taken advantage of, which is like, instead of approaching the person directly, approach somebody that you have a relationship that knows them, and see if they saw the same thing. That's the important thing. See if they saw the same thing.
What's the perspective there?
Right, exactly. Like if I approached your partner or mentor or somebody like that and said like, hey, like, look at this video. Like, are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, actually, here's what it is. Okay, conversation over, done. Versus like if they're like, oh yeah, I do see that. And we have talked about it. Also, conversation done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like, the third option, oh, I've seen it and I haven't said anything about it. I'm willing to say something about it.
Easy, done.
Yeah, done. Least amount of energy possible on all fronts, if you're willing to not have to be the voice.
And that person has somebody like that in their lives. Not everybody has a mentor not everybody has that community, that person close to them that you can go to and kind of relay what you've seen.
Yeah, for the soloists that gets challenging too, and on that
and that's
front,
the scariest. Those are the scariest ones. So like, what do you do?
So let's talk about that for a second. I know that you're coming to a stage that you're starting to get hit up for mentorship. Mm-hmm. What do you make of that, and how have you been dealing with it?
Well, I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is that immediate imposter syndrome is, oh, whoa, why am I somebody that you see as somebody that could mentor you and show you in the sport?
Why do you not?
I look to all that came before me and the mentors that my mentors had, and the experience that and the time in the sport that came with all of those things. And I think my understanding of a mentor is somebody that is way farther ahead of you than way farther ahead of you, and not necessarily like unattainable, but they are a full few chapters ahead. And I understand now that it can be really helpful to be with people and to hang out with people that are just a few steps ahead of you, and as not as unattainable in your mind as you may seem, because of course you don't want to have a goal of people. You always want to like surpass that. But I think it definitely scared me. It does still make me really anxious to think like, oh, I am somebody that has been in this sport for not a very long time and not a ton of experience in certain things. Why would I be somebody that another person would regard as worthy of teaching or learning? And I think the biggest thing there is that my understanding of a mentor doesn't need to be this end all be all God that you'll never get to. It is just somebody that can help you. I mean, I guess a lot of it is critical decision making, but not necessarily somebody that's teaching you all of the fundamentals of all of these things, but somebody that you can look at and say, all right, this is how they're processing this. This is how they're looking at the risk factors and stacking those. Just being around that is huge. And so I might not be, I'm definitely not the person that somebody's going to come to and chat a ton of theory and a ton of really heavyweight base stuff. But if I'm going out on an exit with somebody, they could very well listen to my thought process out loud about what I'm revering as a threat, what's different, what's the same, how am I feeling about this jump, like what decisions am I looking at in front of me. And I think that's really valuable, but it's spooky. I'm not, my idea of a mentor is seeing all these other mentors that are so far ahead and so different. But then I also have to think back to skydiving. I mean, good Lord, you can be a coach before you can even have a camera on your head. I always thought that was insane. Like,
and on the front of like mentorship and you looking at mentors saying like, all right, I don't look like that. I'm kind of curious about this. Like when you first started, I wonder if you would see who you would want as a mentor differently. Like, I assume that now at 200 jumps, your mentors are now like the upper level people of the sport, right? But that wasn't the case when you were at jump 1.
Yeah.
You know, those people were intermediates at that stage. And so, like, if you're judging yourself based on the same criteria of what you're experiencing now, then, like, yeah, clearly, like, you know, you are not the mentor of, you know, the same caliber as the person that's mentoring you right now.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. You're always, yeah, exactly.
Right. And so, and I think that there's incredible value in multiple, like, empowerment all up and down the chain. You know, like, case in point, there are some people that I just will not be able to understand because the gap between us is too big.
Yeah.
That you will be able to empathize with because you're closer to, like, understanding their mindset.
Absolutely.
And they're closer to being able to, like, say, you're at a position exactly where I want to be.
Exactly.
Right. And that's part of the problem with starting to gain experience and knowledge and turn some of the things that were cognitive decisions into intuition. You know, like nowadays when I go out in wingsuit, it's totally intuitive. You know, it's not mechanical. And so explaining it to somebody takes a lot of effort and time because I'm not at where they're at. I'm not working on the same things they're working on.
Yeah. For you just do it.
I just do it. Yeah. So, like, I think there's incredible value in you being exactly in the place that you are and picking up the pieces on people that see you as somebody to look up to, but also you're somebody that's super approachable to them.
Yeah. I'm a lot more relatable than...
A lot more relatable. Yeah. Like somebody could, like, definitively say, you're exactly the jumper that I want to be right now.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Way more attainable than, you know, the best...
Right.
in
like,
the world.
Yeah. You say that to somebody like Tomek and you're like, okay, I want to be exactly like the jumper that you are right now. And he's like, okay, well then,
yeah, I'll see you in 10 years.
10 years. Right. Yeah. Like, and then I can help you. Like, until then, just don't die.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're not going to understand until then. So,
right. So what do you make of that? Like, does that resonate with you, sit right with you?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely starts to rewire my understanding of, number one, where I'm at, and number two, you know, my voice in all of it and what I can do to help is more than I think.
Totally.
And thinking about it in that perspective, absolutely, my voice matters in being that approachable. You know, you will be where I am much sooner than you probably think you will, you know, because I'm not, in the grand scheme of things, I'm really not that far ahead of the person that just did their first jump course. And,
right. We're all
like,
not
I'm
that
right
far
there.
apart. We're all not, like, you're not that far apart from me. You're not that far apart from, like, the base jump. We're all, like, you know, we've met that criteria, you know? I also think mathematically it gets really challenging when we look to the, like, most experienced people to mentor everybody. Like, mathematically that just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Right.
And as much as you want that knowledge from that specific person, like you talked about before, everybody's going to learn differently. Everybody's going to benefit from different communication styles and different ways of learning, I mean, generally. And so slowly but surely, I definitely have been able to have a voice in group conversations in person. And a lot of it is less specific people coming to me for like an organized mentorship position, you know. It's more roundtable discussion with friends where one person is newer and asking a group, or just trying to get any sort of feedback, and you can come out with them with, this is my experience. And so I think it's been really valuable for me because it also keeps me sharp and keeps me wanting to learn. You know, a lot of people are asking questions that I hadn't even asked yet. So I'm like, oh, well, now I have to think about this too. This is really interesting.
It's really
I love
interesting.
this. Yeah.
See, I think
goes both ways.
That is like the cornerstone to a healthy mentorship relation, in my opinion, is that it's mutually beneficial. You know, like I might have more like knowledge and experience than the person, but we are working on similar problems together, right? They're bringing like their energy and their curiosity and their new perspective to the table. I'm bringing the experience and the knowledge to the table, and we combine those to do something that neither of us could like really, you know, effectively do on our own. Yeah. You know?
And I think that's why it's so difficult to reach people that you're trying to impart, like, oh, you fucked this up, I want to help you. because it's not really a team sport at that point.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's not a we're working together on this. It's a you did this, you know,
Yeah.
don't do it again. And then you come at it like, what the hell's that? You know, like, I don't want to listen to that for whatever reason.
Right.
And so making that a team effort, I think you're right. I think it's one of the biggest things in getting people to listen as well, and feeling confident in me personally, my ability to mentor and help other people coming up in the sport. Because for me, mentoring isn't going to be the person that is never base jumped before and going to the bridge for the first time and asking me questions. It's going to be somebody that, you know, is a little bit closer
Yeah, to your experience.
to my experience, because I'm not the person that, you know, you want to do your bridge first jump course. Like we've established that.
I mean, I think that's the way to go. I think like mentorship is somewhat of a ladder, you know. You seek out the people that have the experience for the individual thing that you're like really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if somebody were coming to me for like wingsuit mentorship right now, I would probably turn them down, like, because like that's not where my head's at.
Yeah.
You know, and there are plenty of people that I can hook them up with, but you know, that's that.
Mm-hmm.
And so like initially, like you find people that are really good at, you know, doing the introductory training. Then you find somebody that's really good at, you know, the cliff jumping. And then you find, you know, a Jamie Crawford person to like do the building stuff, you know, and eventually you like ride that ladder to wherever you want to go.
Yeah. And if you can take that mentality to it, so many people, you can learn so much from so many people when you don't maybe take into account the entirety of their being and what they're doing. Because there's some base jumpers out there that are, you know, a bit drama causing in the community and have a lot of taking sides and et cetera, that there are aspects of their progression and aspects of their knowledge that could really resonate with some people and hugely help them. But if they're looking at the whole picture, they're gonna push that away because of X, Y, and Z, whatever face that person's putting on in the community, et cetera, et cetera. If they can look at it as just, I just want to learn, you know, if you get judged for who you're listening to, like, oh, you heard that from that person, you know, there's a bunch of that in the community. Like, why are you listening to them? And then you have to go and defend yourself. But a lot of it can be valid as, well, yes, that person is really sketchy in X, Y, and Z, but I'm aware of that and I'm learning ABC from them.
Like if I can give everybody out there some Teflon, and you especially, I can say that like anyone that's approaching that conversation by bringing up reputation first is wrong. They're just wrong.
Yeah.
Like, look, like this is a game of life and death.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all personal drama and bullshit aside, if somebody's got something relevant to tell you, like they could be the worst person in the world. And like, it behooves you to go and get that information. Like if you listen to Jacob Gardner's episode, he talks a lot about how he accrued all of the knowledge in rigging. And there are some like prickly characters in rigging.
Yeah.
You know, and he's just like, I just didn't give a shit. Like I just needed the knowledge. I needed to know how to do this stuff. And so I suffered through everything else that like I was put through just to do it. You know, and hopefully like you don't have to do that too much. Like base jumping, there's a fair variety of people. But I do think people get caught out in like only wanting to interact with people that they like, you know, that are fun.
And that narrows the pool.
Substantially, you know, and my advice on that front is like, look, all these people are around to like hang out with and jump with and party with and have a great time. And they can be your best friends in the world. But also like understand that there's a job to be done. The job to be done initially is to get excellent at this thing. And, you know, you can do that in a ton of different ways and the person might not mesh. Like I certainly have, you know, stopped meshing quite, you know, the same as I used to with, you know, the really gung-ho Sandy jumpers, you know, like even though I was definitely one of those people for 10 years, you know, and similarly, like there are people that are more mathematically minded, more analytic, more intuitive, more emotional, you know, that you get along with on a human level better, but are not necessarily the right people to teach you one element of the sport.
Well, that's another issue we got. Finally, we find the person that you're going to listen to and that teaches you the right way, but they're not saying the right things.
Right,
you know?
like,
God damn it. Now what?
So if you were the queen of the world and you could like kind of control our culture, what would you do to try and alleviate that issue?
Well, I mean, the biggest impasse with that I see is the entire culture of base jumping is built around this renegade freedom that we have to just go buy this parachute and go do this thing. And to encroach on that freedom is to encroach on our identities and who we have tied ourselves to be. And so to regulate this world is really difficult, even though it might be the most sustainable or least sustainable. People have a lot of opinions on that, but how do you regulate something that in its essence is meant to be free? And the whole point of it is to be free. And I'm not saying I would want, as the queen of the world, to regulate the entrance into base jumping and the learning to base jumping, because again, everybody's going to learn different. So, you're going to cut out a lot of people that learn different from that experience. But I think a lot and have expressed to my friends a lot about the sustainability of base jumping in Moab in particular, and what I'm seeing as somebody who is no longer the freshest of the base jumpers, and am starting to see more people below me, that they're like, actually are people below me now, coming in and seeing Moab as just this giant playground, which it is, that anybody can come to, and that even you need a very specific list to check off before you are ready to come jump here. And it's really frustrating as somebody that sees themselves settling down in this town and wanting to preserve the stoke and the ability to jump the way that we jump here, to see all of these fresh people come in and just almost want to bulldoze everything. And just for the Instagram clip, and the people that are coming in a month, 2 months off of their FJC, specifically hiring videographers and people to follow them around and film everything. And it's frustrating to see people come into the sport with a mentality that is different from your own, but even more so a mentality that is dangerous to the sport, and the people that have so much stoke that they're not willing to listen, because in their mind, any feedback is dulling their sparkle, dulling their excitement, and you're killing their spirit, when in reality you want to see them as much as they want to see them continue jumping for the rest of their life.
Yeah,
of course,
crush it.
And your principal interest is always going to be yourself and self-preservation. And I think a lot of people in Moab, I'm starting to slowly see why not everybody, when you come here, is the most bubbly, friendly, excited to take you on adventures person. Is not because they have an issue with you, is they're trying to protect themselves and their way of life with jumping. And on that note, it takes me to something else that I see that I don't think people respect enough in Moab during Turkey Boogie, and just generally in the sport with big groups of people, is the concept of party loads, and the thought that it's also casual until it's not. And when I'm looking at who I'm jumping with and the big groups, I'm not just looking at who I get to share the stoke with. I'm looking at who I'm going to be rescuing, and I'm looking at who's going to be rescuing me.
Yep.
And that has changed my mentality with jumping so much, as I feel a lot more confident in my decision making of, I'm going to tolerate this or I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm going to remove myself from a situation that could potentially end poorly. And it's not something that may be my responsibility to save that person from whatever incident might or might not occur. We don't know. But I can remove myself from the situation and not be a part of it if I don't agree with it. And so it's so scary during Turkey Boogie, because people will show up to the park and everybody's out for themselves. They're not out
for the crew,
for the betterment of you at all times. If you're in a group and some rando comes up and asks if they can join a load that you're already talking publicly about, like what's gonna
do?
Yeah, and there's always gonna be people that are gonna just let that happen, and that's fine. But the newbies have to understand that they're not out for your best interest. They're not really thinking, is this something that this person is prepared for, this approach, this jump, this exit, whatever it is. That's on you. And furthermore, more so than who am I going to rescue, who's going to rescue me, it's still really fun to be in big whole groups and jump with a bunch of people. It's just recognizing the risk factor that adds. And I think there's a lot of people I've noticed that don't respect that as a risk factor. They don't think about how decision making can change in a group, and the group think, and they don't think, well, what happens? Like, I had an instance that frustrated me quite a bit that I reflected on and realized was mostly on me for the way that I set it up. But I had a bunch of people that I really cared about and that used to live in Moab that no longer did, visiting. They were only here for a short amount of time. Of course, it was right in the middle of Thanksgiving week. I wanted to share a really special jump with them that I had not done before. And it was a very hairy, technical-ish, everything goes right and it's great, everything goes wrong and you're screwed jump. So in my mind, the first thing was, how are we managing risk in this situation? And what I should not have done is a party load. That was already an issue. But in my mind, less than 10 people, they're all people that I have an intimate knowledge of their jumping. I know them very well. They know me very well. I would feel comfortable and confident in any emergency situation with these 10 people.
Yeah.
And I emphasized, and I'm a newer jumper. I'm not somebody that enjoys putting together loads for people. You know, I'm not the person that's like gathering the troops to go do all these cool things. I'm joining you, or I'm going off on my own and doing what I'm comfortable with in a very small number of people that I like. So I set the stage of planning this jump with people that were in town and said very specifically, hey, I want to manage risk here. I love everybody that's in town right now. There's so many people here that I would love to jump with. This is not me saying I don't want to jump with you. This is me in self-preservation mode, trying to make sure everybody gets down safely on something that I am taking responsibility for. Like, this was the first time that I had put together a load like this where, like, hey, I'm telling people where to meet. I'm telling people what to do if something goes wrong. I'm responsible.
Yeah.
A lot more than I have been in the past. And so I was trying to be very clear with what I was comfortable with in that responsibility. Yeah. And that was not adding people to the load.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. In fact, just to give a shout out to a friend, Jack Lane, the last time I had a course come through Moab, I generally try and find people that are in town that are, in my opinion, experts, just to like interact with us. Mm-hmm. And one of them was Jack Lane. And, you know, along the lines of interacting with him, I asked him, you know, what is the best advice that you can give to these folks who are just starting their journey here in Moab? And he goes, you need to break up your group into assets and liabilities. He's like, if you've got more liabilities than assets on the jump, you better, man, this better not be that complicated, and you better be on your shit, you know, but strive for like the vast majority of the group size to be assets rather than liabilities. Mm-hmm.
And I'd say we had about 80% asset, 20% liability on that jump.
Yeah, that's a healthy
so I
margin.
Felt comfortable. I curated very specifically the group, and it's not to say the people that I didn't pick like weren't good enough or this or that. It was just the people that in that moment I felt the most safe and comfortable with, and I could only choose 10. You know, even 10 was too many for this jump, truthfully. But in my mind, I wanted to jump with all my friends. Anyways, fast forward. It is the week of Thanksgiving, so I didn't say that this was a secret, you know, like you can't talk about it, and people are naturally like, oh, what are you going to jump next? And like, oh, well, I'm going to do this, you know. And so word gets out and people start getting upset that I called it like the super secret party load.
Yeah, like they take it, you know, they take it personally that it's like exclusive, and you're like, well, like I'm not trying to exclude anybody, but there is a market cap here, you know, like we cannot just, you know, there's another opportunity. We'll do another jump together, you know?
Exactly.
Just like
this exit will patient. Always be, well, theoretically, it will always be here for the rest of our lives.
Right.
We can jump it at any time. There's no rush. And I think a lot of people coming to Moab visiting feel that rush of, I'm here for a week and I've had this laundry list of things that I've been dying to get to. I have to do it. I had a friend with a scary instance because he pushed himself when he wasn't ready. And he was like, I'm leaving tonight. I have to do this thing that I've been dreaming of.
Yeah.
Went out alone and
Boom.
touch and go'd on the Fisher Tower, on the
Yep.
Kingfisher. Anyways, the first thing that went wrong with this jump and this is a very big learning experience, which is why I'm talking about this, because maybe somebody else can also learn something. First thing that went wrong was one of the people on the jump had a bunch of friends come into town that, of course, all wanted to jump this exit and were very stoked about it. And he, in his mind, his risk management was, okay, I'm not going to be able, like, they really, really want to do this. And they're really, they might be hurt that they can't come on this one load and they're going to be leaving soon. I'm just going to take them separately. Mm-hmm. But he did not just take them separately. He took them about 20 minutes before us. So essentially, the only reason that I was trying to keep the load small was for risk management, not have a bunch of people up there. Yeah. He did the exact opposite, where
compounded
there
everything.
were a bunch of people right before us. And this is an exit that had a rope section on the way up, and that the other options for jumping they were also rope sections. There was no super easy way out of this experience. And so that was really frustrating to see that decision making where I didn't even know. And that's the other thing. I wasn't communicated with that was happening. I wasn't communicated that person was no longer coming on the jump that I planned. And so we were waiting in the parking lot. Like, is he going to show up? And got to the top and heard a radio of that person radioing to be like, oh, we just jumped, like, blah, blah, blah. And I was stunned. Yeah. Because I had just brought 10 people up here, and my first thought was, what happened if one of the 10 or 5, I guess it was 5 people he brought, what would have happened if one of them had impacted?
You guys would have been in a world of shit.
We would have been on top, unable to jump down that way, and then we're faced with 10 people down climbing this sketchy rope section. I gave us a good bit of time before sunset, but in that instance, we would have hit sunset and we would have been down climbing in the dark. Or we would have gone over to jump well done, which is, more rope sections, more scary. And in my head, people are not in the best headspace once they've seen trauma like
obviously.
that.
Yeah,
so like
we've touched on that one
premier,
quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. The premier choice would be to walk down, and this is not an exit you can do that from. And so that was frustrating. And then because word got out and people got a little butthurt, I think, that it wasn't for all. It was kind of like a screw you, I'm going to come anyways. And we're going up the rope section, heading up to the jump. And I see at least 10 more people coming up. And my fight or flight goes nuts. And I like take a breath, and then I start yelling down just like, hey, what are you guys jumping? Like, what are you guys going to jump? And they knew. They lied and they knew. They were like, oh, we're not, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And next thing I know, there's 25 people on top of this arch that you're supposed to jump through that is quite technical and not really meant to be jumped through, for being honest.
Right. Sideshow.
Yeah. And that's harrowing as somebody that put together that load and tried to emphasize why I was doing what I was doing with keeping the numbers small. And I think I learned a lot where if you're trying to keep the number, if you're doing something for risk management, don't half-ass it. Don't because you love all these people and you really want.
Yep.
If I really valued risk management, I would have taken 3 people up there, and we would have not told anybody, and we would have just done it. I had the drone there, so Parker was filming everybody. Everybody was stoked and ready to get like good footage. And so I don't blame anybody that came on that jump that I did not invite. That is not something I hold against them, and I don't want them to feel like I was trying to exclude them or got mad that they showed up when they weren't supposed to. I was afraid for my life, and I was afraid for all of the people that I had gathered here with the intention of, I'm trying to do this with a balance of the best I know how and the best of what I want, which is to be with all my friends and to share the stoke with so many amazing people. And so the anxiety and the anger that I felt after was all just residual from, I don't want to watch anybody die. I don't want anybody to get hurt. I want this all to go well. And everything did go well. Everybody was safe. Everybody landed. We were all so excited, so happy. I have never been more anxious in that moment.
Yeah. And everyone will look at that as a success because we all like landed safely.
Yeah.
However, like I think you're right on the money. I think we all need to kind of take a step back and see that it's not excluding me from the jump. It is just acknowledging that there are only a certain amount of slots that are like really doable here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, you know, if we were in Formula One racing, it's like, look, there's only so many slots on the starting grid. I'm sorry. Like, you put another car out here and all of a sudden, like, the leaders are lapping the people in the back, and this becomes a complete mess.
Clusterfuck.
Right. And so, like, I think, unfortunately, your judgment and analysis on this particular concept is Formula One territory at this stage. Though I think, like, ultimately, if we're going to be successful as a culture, as a community, have less than 31 deaths, like, this is something that people need to learn at, like, go-kart racing level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like at the bridge, really. And it's not taught. Like, you know, we go out there and it's like, okay, class is done. All right, everyone in the class separate, you know, all the way down the bridge. Like, let's grab all the friends, grab everybody else. Let's fucking hawk this shit with everybody we can, bro.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, that's what they get taught. And it's like, well, why would you exclude me? I'm going to nail it. So, like, I'm not going to be part of this thing, you know, versus you looking at it critically from a responsibility perspective and saying, statistically, if we've got 20 people up here, that doesn't just like incrementally increase the risk, it exponentially increases the risk.
Huge.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, oh my gosh, I recognize, and I think we touched on this in the park a little bit, I recognize that group dynamics change my decision making an insane amount. You know, I get stoked on the end of an exit and people are all talking about new flips and new that and new this, and I'm now distracted thinking about how stoked I am for other people, or what somebody else is like, oh, is this chill? Like, oh, I think it goes. Or how tall is this? Oh, 42 stowed.
42
and you're like, oh,
stowed, bro.
the number of times I've heard that.
Okay, do you know the background story to this one? There's like somewhat of a background to that sentiment, like becoming popularized.
I know that I have heard it, but I cannot off the top of my head. So please,
yeah.
indulge.
So where I first came across this was Luke Chappell. Luke Chappell is an Australian bass jumper in the 2000 teens. Very sendy, very gung ho. Ask Farrell about him. He ginsued 3 canopies of Farrell's in one trip once. He has an entire like reel of him just like going into the trees repeatedly and just like coming back up and just cruising and, you know, sending it. One of the things he loved to do is just go out to Moab and open a new cliff that was like, in his opinion, doable. Just like looking at it and going like, okay, that goes, like no measurements, just like completely intuitive, that goes, you know? And so he'd open something and then somebody would be like, okay, man, like how tall is that? And he's like, I don't know, bro. It's like a 42 stowed, or he'd say like it's a 48 handheld, or, you know, it's like, oh yeah, you got to pitch right away. You know, it's 48, like, you know, throw and go, you know? And then people not understanding that first he was approaching it from like a reckless point of view. And also he was kind of making fun of people who were asking him this stuff. Like, you're asking me how tall this is? Do you have any idea who I am? Dude, it's a 42 stowed. Other than that, like I got nothing for you. And for some reason, like that ended up catching on as this like colloquial term that we all now use almost in seriousness. How tall is that? 42 stowed. Like, not understanding that it was a complete troll.
Yeah. Oh yeah. People say that serious all the time. That's so funny. I don't know if I've actually ever heard that.
That's where I first experienced it. Unfortunately, again, we're gonna have to pour one out for Luke Chappell. He's no longer with us. That was tragedy, but also like something that I think very much he was leaning towards, and so it's an interesting one. That being said, I very much applaud your perspective and judgment on this one front. I think like that one is one of the most important things that we can, you know, kind of take home, and maybe a great place to end. I know that we've gone through a lot, and, you know, man, we started this with you saying like, I don't know if I have much to say at all. And all of a sudden we're like, you know, hours into this thing, and we could keep going forever. So I'm going to say thanks for giving me your perspective and chatting through a lot of these topics, which like I've learned a lot from you and how to like kind of approach some of the conversations that are frustrating me. So thanks very much for taking your time.
Yeah, thank you. It's always transformative to have conversations like these and learn and feel my perspective changing as I'm responding or as I'm talking about it, and feel myself learning and progressing
Nice.
in the conversation side of things. So I appreciate you very much.
You're welcome, and we'll catch you down the road.
Absolutely. Happy jumping.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any thoughts about what you've just heard, please don't hesitate to hit us up. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, please visit exitpointpodcast.com. See you on the next one.